Have you been stressed, anxious, or worried? Have you felt pangs of loneliness in recent times? Are you longing for greater connection with others in the world around you? In a phrase, are you looking for happiness? You are not alone. Millions of others are seeking this feeling of spiritual, mental, and physical wellness too. This podcast explores the underlying causes of unhappiness and shares with us the secrets of rewriting the frequent thoughts and redirecting the common behaviors that keep us in that state. Join forensic psychologist and best-selling author Dr. Neehall and her guests as they dive deep in the realm of psychological wellness and explore ways of finding happiness on demand.
Hi everyone, it's Dr. Joan Neehall. Welcome again to my podcast entitled Happiness on Demand. Today we have a fantastic guest in our audience. We have Mike Randall, who is going to be showing us how he's used creativity and dyslexia to create happiness. Mike Randall is a Red Seal endorsed light designer based in Victoria, British Columbia. A master of wood bending, Mike combines complex traditional craft with contemporary and minimalist forms to create absolutely stunning pieces for both residential and commercial spaces. I've had the honor actually of seeing some of these. If you have the chance to look at his website, I really encourage you to do it. You'll be blown away like I was. And it takes a lot for me to be blown away, I tell you. Mike credits his ability to create boundary-pushing forms to his nonlinear dyslexic thinking. So for those of you who are dyslexic, there is hope. Just look at him and look at what he has been able to do with what was considered a deficit. It's now his strength. So I guess that's what I'm saying today to all of us, that let's use what people construe as our weaknesses. Let's channel it and use it as our strength today. Mike is known for his contemporary approach, and he's inspired by forms and shapes both from the natural world and everyday life. Mike Randall Design fosters a philosophy that if we look after our immediate environment, global issues will become easier to manage. And I want to repeat that because I think it's very poignant, especially in the light of the epidemics, the struggles that we faced, and everything that's occurring right now in terms of complex issues, political issues, climate issues. And Mike says that if we look after our immediate environment, global issues will become easier to manage. With that in mind, Mike only uses non-toxic glues and finishes, and he endeavors to use sustainably sourced North American hardwood in every single one of his pieces. He's received numerous awards and nominations for his work and has consistently appeared in the media, in design magazines and newspapers, both locally and internationally. So, Mike, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me on.
It's my pleasure and privilege, and I'm sure our subscribers and listeners will be thrilled. Tell us a little bit about what made you choose your current profession.
It really stems from, my background was in forestry. I came to Canada and I worked on the water, running sailboats, running tugs and whale watching boats. And then during the recession in 2008, I was laid off, and I'd helped a few friends out designing fences and sort of doing outdoor wood design work. And they encouraged me to go to the Quotient and sort of follow up on that. And when I did that, I met Sandra, who's the current instructor at the Fine Furniture program, but in those days she was sort of teaching we call them weekend warriors, and she encouraged me to take the actual full-time program. And that was 2010, 2011. And then from there I'd gone into it as having been raised in an antique dealer's house, so that was very much my sort of design knowledge at the time. And when we got into the sort of art history side of it, I discovered the mid-century modernists and bending wood and Charles and Ray Eames. And became really excited. I'd never seen anything like it. And so I became sort of addicted to manipulating wood and materials. And then when I came out of there, after a couple of years, I was chatting with a close friend of mine whose daughter lives next door. And he just built a house on 10 Mile and challenged me to solve a lighting problem. I'd never touched lights before that. But he wanted me to use bent wood and new LEDs. And through that, really, my bowl lamp was born. And I took it to the design show in Vancouver. And the rest, as they say, is history.
So some of your designs are right now in your workshop that I'm seeing in your studio. Can you show us some of them?
I can. I mean, just have to...
Yeah, there we go. Now you can see it.
There we go. Yeah. So directly behind me is an S light, which was conceived out of error and when making a bowl lamp. And the shape was beautiful, and it took me a couple of years, but I figured out a way of using it, and that's become very popular. And then I have a number of other lights behind me showing different stages of my process.
So you mentioned Camosun, and for those of you who don't know what Mike is referring to, he's referring to Camosun College, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. And you teach there as well, or consult?
I do. I teach part-time and help Sandra, who runs the program. I help her out when she needs non-contact days and time off.
So your trajectory is an interesting one, isn't it? You've moved from one career to another. Yeah.
Yes, very much so.
What gave you the courage to do it? Because I know a lot of people would feel, oh, maybe I shouldn't give up this forestry or whatever else I'm doing because that's a solid paycheck and I'm going into nothing. Oh, anxiety. Let's get it up a little bit, right?
Yeah.
I'm wondering if that happened to you, and can you tell us what happened there?
I think really, not to go into too much detail, but I come from a fairly privileged background in the UK. And when I came to Canada initially, finances weren't, number one. I was young too. And I believed I believed I could do whatever I chose to do. And since then, very luckily, I have an enormously supportive spouse. And I always say behind every creative individual professional, there is an enormously supportive spouse because it's a roller coaster ride. And I think that's what gave me the courage to make changes. And I saw something that really interested me. And as I tried to make it work as best I can. And with the recession, the first thing I got out of working on charter boats, mostly because the downturn, 2005, 2006, there was a downturn in tourism. So I guess finances pushed me that way. And then with tugs, the recession in 2008, and the C-SPAN essentially cleared their decks. And so I have to keep busy. I cannot sit still.
So one of the things you're teaching us is to make a career change of this magnitude, I would say. It's important to have a good, solid social network. You were talking friends and a spouse as well, if you're fortunate enough to have a spouse. But I think what's important is that social piece is what you're telling me, right?
Yeah. Very much so.
Having a friend challenge you to create something, and then you did it. So what you're teaching us is that one of the important components to unleashing your creativity and to making a change like this lies in a solid support network, much more so than a background that could be a wealthy one or a poor one. It's the idea of having that support.
Yeah, the support network. I mean, your financial situation does really drive the necessity. Even if you're someone who is happy to make changes and is keen to make changes, the financial side can dictate how that happens because necessity is there. but combating the fear of change and always being able to take risks and trusting yourself that you will make it work and you will give it everything you've got.
See, so what you're talking about is the idea that, or the notion that we have agency. We've got control over our destiny, no matter how grim it might seem or how awful the recession was. We can change things if we've got that network in place. And more important, I liked what you just said, because I think it resonated with me, and I'm sure it does with all of my audience. It's so important to have that feeling of connection with people who can help us move, right?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, I've built up we have a very, very large friend network. I always say, I joke, my son's the youngest of 13 kids. There's a lot of families in our neighborhood. We're very fortunate where we live. It's the friend network, and also within the work industry. I'm always making connections and helping people out, and I reach out to people for help. And without that, it would be incredibly challenging.
So now you're adding a new piece into the namely vulnerability.
Yeah.
An ability to say, here I am, and I'm not feeling as confident as I appear. Help me. Or
Absolutely.
So tell us a little bit about what increases your happiness at work, Mike.
The creative rush, I think. It is very much, it's a bit of a roller coaster. So you have to look at the happiness in a broad spectrum, because on a day-to-day, you can come up with an idea and you feel elated and excited. And then over the next 2-3 weeks, you can come across, stumbling blocks in that design, and you can feel sort of useless. And I've talked about imposter syndrome and all these feelings that can go through. But if you push through and you trust yourself and you follow through, the end result, when it comes to fruition, is the most enormous reward. And, whether it's, you see it, for me, it's a light. If I had a big light design that I can illuminate for the first time and get really excited about seeing, or whatever your creative, it could be a piece of music, it could be a piece of art.
So it's that notion that you can actually be present in the moment into it.
Yeah, and it's the difference between the sort of the highs and the lows, which give you that enormous sort of sense of excitement and sense of like well-being, and that's like, I really created that.
In my work, I come across a lot of clients who talk about the imposter syndrome, or, feeling not good enough. I remember as a child that story, well, Mom, the emperor is wearing no clothes.
Yes.
And it's interesting to hear how you have struggled with it and arguably still struggle with it.
Oh, yeah.
And how you deal with it. So tell us a little bit about that. Can you give us an example or two of that imposter syndrome and how you sweated through it or how it worked for you?
I think the most important thing with it, feelings like that, is accepting them and realizing that they are part of the creative process. Every artist I've spoken to feels the same way. So don't feel that, it's unique to you, and there are ways of overcoming it. I mean, really, for me, it is just pushing on. It's that sort of you go through, if something doesn't work or an event doesn't go the way you'd envisioned it, you can feel useless and sort of like, I've been doing this for so long, and yet this is still happening. But not dwelling on it and going, okay, how do I fix this? How do I fix this mistake? Maybe I start again. But moving forward and learning from what went wrong can really, really help. And it's an inevitable feeling. It's about how fast you can get out of it.
So two things that you've talked about is the importance of welcoming those feelings, never mind how ugly and unsettling
Yeah.
and they are. Stay with the discomfort. Bring it in, bring
Yeah.
it on, instead of pushing it away, because our society will push us to denial. Let's
Yeah.
just it all. And what you're saying is the opposite is true. Just accept the feelings, let them come, let them go without judgment.
Yes. And it's building a community within your creative field.
Yes.
If you're a musician, building a community of like-minded musicians that you enjoy collaborating with, because nothing beats going out in the evening after a really tough day and going, this is what my day was like. And they're like, yep, I had that 3 weeks ago. Look at those conversations can really, really help.
Again, we're underscoring the importance of that community, that social piece, the social network, because, it is lodged in our DNA that we are social animals. And so that part is important. But what you're saying is not just your social connection outside of work, but more important, a connection of like-minded souls at work. So it doesn't matter which area you're in, the loneliness piece will go if you've got that in place.
Yeah, exactly. And you've got people to bounce your thoughts off and ideas off. And, maybe they're not the people you work side by side every day, but they're people who are in the industry or, artists, similar artists who understand your piece.
And how does this tie into your philosophy on life?
I'm very community minded. For me, I'm very family minded. My wife was a professional and full-time work, and I was the stay-at-home. The abbreviation is stay-at-home dad. I was working too, but I've always worked from home. So when the kids were little, I was able to, answer the phone, go to school early, pick up, run that piece of lunch over or whatever that was forgotten. So that sort of thing. A good family life and a good community network is really part of my philosophy, and just sort of being kind to people, understanding my clients, understanding everybody who works on a particular project, and then designing my products and my art around that to make it as easy for them as possible. So that, I like to come away. I've done some big sort of commercial projects, and very often I'll hear, oh, your piece was the easiest thing we had to deal with. Like, perfect. I didn't contribute to anyone's bad day.
So purpose for you would give you happiness. And what is your purpose then?
My purpose in life, being creative, really. I'm driven to be creative. I came at it very late. I found my missing piece when I did find it.
Like how late in life? I think our listeners would want to hear that.
I was 35 when I went back to school. 35. I was at 35 to 36, that sort of age. Mm-hmm. I had my second kid, and really it was sort of, before I worked on the water because I grew up on the water, and that was great. And I tried these different jobs, but none of them were truly creative. And that's when I discovered that side of myself. My mom's an artist, and I always wondered where that piece was, because I can't draw particularly well. And so I always sort of thought, I missed that gene, but apparently I didn't.
And then you talked about dyslexia as well. Mm-hmm. That affect you when you were going to school?
Oh yes, they did. Yes, I went through the English boarding school system, and the concept of neurodivergence was not really understood. And so I discovered in high school that I was dyslexic, and by that point I had already sort of essentially given up academically, and felt smaller because I wasn't particularly sporty and I wasn't particularly academic. I wasn't academic at all. But then as I moved through life, I sort of realized that that's what affected my thinking. And I mean, I was never tested for ADHD, but I've got a lot of friends and family who are, and the similarities are uncanny. And an enormous number of creatives are neurodivergent in some way. It is incredibly common. And so I embrace it. And I think really it's why I become almost as obsessive at looking at design. It's that sort of like tick, 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 trying to figure out what's working, what's not.
You mentioned in high school you became aware that you were dyslexic, even though you weren't tested in the English system of education in boarding school. Wondering, a quick question, did it affect your self-esteem? And if so, in what way? Because you mentioned not being a nerd, a bookworm, not excelling academically, not excelling sports-wise. So, I mean, you excelled in.
Yeah, I was sporty in my own right. I was a swimmer and skier, but in the school system that didn't
Exactly.
I wasn't soccer, rugby, cricket, those main ones. Yeah. So I never really felt I fitted in particularly well. My coping mechanism was to be, I call it Tiggerish, very bouncy, very smiley, but inside quite lonely. And I think, always feeling sort of that I didn't quite match up to everybody else I was around.
Yes, I mean, these are important things to share with our listeners today, because you're talking about one man's journey from not fitting in any sense of the word to moving into his mid-30s and taking that plunge to go back to Camosun College to learn something else, educate himself, even though he had a family at that point and a wife, and then moving forward and finding your niche finally.
Yeah. And I love it, and I feel connected, and I spend a lot of time connecting with people who I feel comfortable being around and can talk design and just sort of just nice, good people. And that's really important, is to finding, to happiness is finding really nice, good people to spend your time with.
And purpose for you then would be work-oriented, or in the creativity coming through in your designs, or when lighting fixtures and things like that.
Yeah. And my garden, but yes, that's my sort of break from this happiness, is that happiness. So, yes,
that's what.
Yeah. But I can't not. I'm a very, very busy person. I get up at 5 a.m. and I start work at 6, and I just constantly fill my time with things and people and doing things.
And you're not talking about filling it with noisy, useless activities. You're saying you're very purpose-driven and goal-oriented. And then the other part of happiness, apart from purpose, is meaning, deriving meaning in life. And most people will tell me that while purpose is ego-driven or it's work-oriented, meaning involves, in my case, it's helping people tell their stories in whatever form it takes. And that gives me a lot of meaning in my life. Yeah. I'm just very blessed and grateful to be able to share in other people's trajectories. What about you?
For me, it's similar in some ways. For me, it is teaching. Mm-hmm. Not just the teaching, but teaching anybody who's interested, and anybody who wants to know, whether it's young up-and-coming artists or people who just retired from professional life and are looking to see how do they find fulfillment in their retired life. And I can help sort of guide them into having a small workshop and becoming creative and things like that. And I also work out, I'm doing various sort of on the sidelines of various projects. The new maker space in Victoria, I've got a small sort of just advisory capacity on that.
Can you tell us a little bit about that, Mike? Because our listeners are from all over the world.
Yeah. It's a very, very, very new project. So it's sort of beginning, they're just getting it off the ground, but there's maker spaces all over Canada in a lot of rural and city communities. And Victoria there's a few people in Victoria who are just starting or planning one for here, not far from where I live in Fernwood. Mm-hmm. And so helping with things like how to lay out a shop and what are the best tools to start out with where you're not spending money unnecessarily, approaches to classes, how do you set up a shop to teach it and things like that. So they've just I've had a couple of meetings with them. So projects like that. And then I will also get to teach there a little bit.
Wonderful. So to summarize, what you're teaching us today is the importance of community, the importance of being purpose-driven in life, and learning how to be what I would call you an ingenious survivor. In spite of the deficits that you were born with, you learned how to overcome them in your personal journey. And I think that's important. And the courage implicit to being vulnerable. So on behalf of my listeners and myself, I want to say thank you for spending time with us and sharing this valuable insight.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for joining this discussion on happiness. We hope this helps to inspire you to lead a more joyful life. To dive deeper into the subject of happiness, be sure to check out Dr. Neehall's book, Happy is the New Healthy, available as an ebook or hardcover. For additional resources, visit our website at drneehall.com. Until next time, stay happy.